Hey everyone, it's the Book Bear. Today I'm going to do the magical species tags from Joe Lee at Joe Lee's Books. I was tagged to do this by the Book Brew. And book number 1, Demon, a book that should go back to the drawing board. I'm sorry, George Martin, you wrote some good stuff. Fever Dream is not one of them. Great idea. Vampires and post-Civil War South, right up my alley, but the book just could not live up to it. So George Martin, rewrite this better, and maybe I'll like it more. Number 2, Angel, a book that brought you pure happiness. Now, back in Christmas time, the wonderful Book Brew got me a box set of Neil Gaiman kids' books that included a British-only release called Unfortunately the Milk. This is just a terrific read. It's hilarious, it's fun, and it's not too long, so you can breeze through it in like a couple hours at most, unless you're just reading really, really slow and you're severely distracted. So yes, this is a book you should read if you are sad. You read it, and you laugh, and you enjoy it. Zombie, a book that took you a very long time to read. Feast for Crows. I know, I'm not copying Book Brew, I promise. I started reading this right after I read the third one, and I decided not to keep reading it at that time. 6 months later, I went on a road trip to Washington. I was, like 19, 20 at the time. I went on a road trip to Washington with my parents. I read it in the car because I had nothing else to read. And so that's how long it took me to read this, 7 months. Because it's not a terrible book, but it's not a good book like the other series, rest of the series. Siren, a book that reeled me in only to kill me. I'm actually going to do a whole series for this. It's the Night Watch series, which I only have the second and third one right now, because the first one was lost and someone borrowing it. This is a Russian series by Sergei Lakyanenko. If I offend any Russian person by that pronunciation, I'm sorry, I'm not Russian. It's a really interesting series. It's about, these two groups of people, the Night Watch and the Day Watch. The Night Watch is full of wizards and some shapeshifters, and the Day Watch is full of like the vampires and the really bad monsters. And there was, long story short, there was a big civil war back in like the 1700s, and they decided to split up the Night Watch and Day Watch. Night Watch was to watch the bad guys, Day Watch was to watch the good guys. And there's all this really cool magic. There are detective stories. There's like several short stories that tie together in each one. And the series started out really good, but I feel like towards the end it kind of petered out. I never did read the last 2 books, I believe. So I do need to finish the series, to really speak about it that much. But I felt like by the time we got to Twilight Watch, it was kind of like, it just kind of droned on. There was a lot of sameness in the writing. So, but don't let that deter you. Definitely read Night Watch, because Night Watch is really good. But proceed at your own risk after that. All right, Nightmare, a book that gave me weird dreams or nightmares. John freaking dies at the end, by David Wong. This was also turned into a movie, which you can probably find on Netflix. This book is just, it's great. It's weird as you can imagine. It's got dimensional travel, alien beings, soy sauce is a drug that allows you to go to other dimension. The sequel to this book is called This Book is Full of Spiders. Seriously, don't touch it. Just shows you kind of how odd the series is, and it definitely would give you weird dreams if you read it. I highly recommend it though, because it actually is really, really good. My editor seems to have a question. Yes? No? Okay. We'll maybe cut that part out. Probably not though, because it's more fun. Anyway, Book 6, Vampire, a book that sucked the life out of me. This book is so terrible that I did not own a copy, and while I know that Book Brew does, I did not even want to show it on camera. This is how terrible this book is, and anyone that likes this, I am sorry, you have horrible taste. The Maze Runner. Never read it. If you haven't read it, don't read it. If you read it and you liked it, someone needs to slap you with new taste, because that book is terrible. It should have never been made into a movie franchise. I'm very sad that the dude that plays Lord Peter Baelish in Game of Thrones was in the second one. It almost made me want to see it just to support him, but that is just... I have never read a book that had 0 likable characters, and when your antagonist, your main protagonist is in first person, and he is the most whiniest little jerk in all creation, and every other person in the book is the exact same way, there's no reason to continue to read this book. It's terrible. Don't even. I read the whole series because I'm crazy, but don't. I torture myself so you don't have to.
So 2 thumbs way down.
Yes, very much so. Don't even bother reading it. Don't believe the hype. It is a terrible series. I don't know why. When in the first paragraph of a book, you repeat the same word 5 times, you are not a good author. I'm sorry. It's just how it is. Moving from the worst book of all time to the best book of all time, Shadowhunter. Favorite book of all time. This is actually tied, but I went with the non-heavy epic poem, which would be Dante's Inferno. My second favorite book of all time, well, tied for first, again by Neil Gaiman. There's some sort of pattern there. American Gods, soon to be a show on Showtime. This is a book that I love. There's a cat underneath the camera that is meowing because Book Brew is doing something to it. What that is, I won't tell you. Anyway, this book, there's so much going on. That might be edited out, but maybe not. That was the cat that I spoke of that was under the camera. There's so much going on in this book. You have so many different mythologies that mix in together, and the camera is moving, which is kind of cool while I'm talking about all these mythologies mixing together. You have Norse, you have Russian, you have Egyptian, you have ancient Babylonian. You have so many different things that you get to just read about and pique your interest. There's even African gods. Ananasi Boys is a somewhat sequel to this. It's more of a tie-in, but Mr. Ananasi came from this book, and then there's just so many things that tie together that you get to hear about, read about, and like there's locations that he actually researched from America, which is great because Gaiman is from England, and he researched all these places in America. And for the most part, he actually says in one part of the book, or when you're reading the prelude or whatever the author wrote before the book, he's talking about how he actually did the research, and they're actual places that he talks about, and they're for the most part actually where they are. And so, like, if you actually wanted to follow the roadmap that they take in the book, you could actually do that and go to these places. And it's really cool, really well researched, and just Neil Gaiman has a way of like. When he writes books, he writes them how he wrote comic books. He takes what you would visually see in a comic book and he puts it in word form. And there's a reason why no one really says anything bad about him, because he is just a tremendous, amazing author. I prattle on enough about Neil Gaiman and my fandom for him. There's a picture of him in case you're wondering. Now I show you the back of the books. The next one, Mortal, a book I found to be okay or mundane. World War Z. I'm pretty big into zombie books. I think that if they're well written, they're really worth reading. World War Z by Max Brooks, by the way, his father, Mel Brooks, is one of the best directors of all time, and you should watch everything he ever made. Starting with Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, all those things are just terrific. But enough plug of his father, about the author, Max Brooks. This is a book, it's written in a perspective of a reporter going in and interviewing people after everything has happened. So, by the way, the movie is completely different than the book. Surprise. Like that ever happens. It's an interesting premise, but I just find it to be a little less than it could have been. It could have been a lot more, and I think that if he had spent more time, I think it could have been something a lot more. Moving on, number 9, Witch, a book I found to be magical. Ready Player One. This is a book by Ernest Cline, which I've heard his second book isn't as good, which I kind of am sad about because this is just... If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you will understand every single thing that happens in this book because it is chock full of just geeky music, movie, and game references. It's about the future where this giant MMO was created where you like patch into it like virtual reality, and the creator died, and he created this huge contest. Whoever figures out all the Easter eggs that were planned in the game gets to basically inherit everything the guy left behind. And it's just about these different groups that are trying to get it with the main protagonist and his friends, and then like this big conglomeration company that wants to take it and make it. People have to pay to be part of it, and everything like that. And like I've read this book a few times, and every time it's just like I pick up a little bit more references, and everything is it's a magical book for people that love that time period. You will love it just if you love 80s movies. There's a whole section that's devoted to Rush, the band. Like, there's so much going on, and if you love references from the 80s and 90s, you'll love this book, and it's very magical, so I definitely recommend it. Ready Player One. which I believe is being turned into a movie right now. If you watch Bates Motel, the girl, I can't remember her name, the one with the breathing problem, his friend, she's playing the main girl in the movie, so definitely check it out. Last but not least, number 10, Fairy, a book that wasn't what it seemed. I'm going with my knocking things off my bookshelf. I'm going with the last book I read, Sorcerers Apprentice, by Tom Holt. Now, for fans of Douglas Adams, this is definitely up your alley, except the satire is not big conglomerations coming in and tearing up things. It's about outsourcing, hence the Outsourcing Apprentice. On the surface, this is what this is about. But as you get into it, one, I didn't know this was part of the series. It's called the U-Space Trilogy. I didn't know that. So I haven't read the first two, actually. I read the third one, which is great when you find a book that you don't know is part of a trilogy. You read it and you don't feel lost. You feel like you could just jump in and be fine with it. That's great. But while it's on the surface, it's a satire of outsourcing. There's so much else going on. Like there's a story about a guy that's like kind of feels like, you know, he's on his track, but like he never has really decided what he wants to do for himself, and so like he gets to learn, okay, it's time for me to do this myself. It's about people standing up once they realize that things in their life are wrong. Like, you know, it's like, without spoiling things, there's like, you know, people in life that they realize there's something wrong unjustly, and they decide to stand up and make a change. There's a lot of that in this book, and it's a book I definitely recommend. It's hilarious. I want to read the first ones, but I got to find them. I think they're out of print right now. So definitely recommend this. Yeah, that's about it. That is the last book. I don't know which video we'll be seeing next, because I don't know which video is going to go up in this order. I think I'm going to actually be posting this next, and then, so on Saturday you'll have TEW. On next week you may have the Intro to Wrestling 101. I also have a few other things planned, hopefully soon. I promise I will get a cooking episode up soon. I just gotta make the time and make sure I have the stuff at the time I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna be making a very delicious potato and egg recipe, so look up for that, and that will be coming hopefully in the month of April. And you all have a wonderful day. Goodbye.